the podcast designed to help advisors think, make decisions, and cast a vision to create a business for the future. Here's your host, Ross Marino, financial planner, author, speaker, and CEO of Advisor2X.
Welcome to Outcomes, the podcast. Today we are joined once again by Coach Joe Lukacs. Joe, welcome to the show.
Ross, thanks for having me.
2020 is wrapping up. My 30 years in the business, I think I can say this is the craziest year I have ever experienced. But as we're approaching the end of the year, I'm actually starting to get a little excited as I look towards the future, as I'm thinking about year-end planning and what's going to come up. It's a disrupted time out there. That just means opportunity. So why do you think planning now is probably more important than any time in an advisor's career?
That's a really great question. What I've been sharing with my clients is, look, we entered 2020 with our game plans. March rolled around, everything got changed. And so this year in our industry, in fact, the entire world, basically, it's been adapt, overcome, survive, adapt, overcome. So that gives you a certain kind of mindset for several months now. As we get close to the end of this and we look towards 2021, I really believe that the plan for 2021 for pretty much all advisors is going to be the most critical one, because choices are going to have to be made on either A, am I going to just stay in kind of survival mode and adoption mode, or am I going to really kind of put a vision out there and drive and lead my team and really run my business from a proactive state?
And we're certainly seeing people move beyond survival mode, where we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And as the joke goes, it's not a train coming at us, it's actually a light. So we know things are going to get better eventually. And I think that's starting to create some excitement out there. But even for the advisors who are now starting to look forward, if you look at how most advisors function, you'd probably say that most don't have a written strategic plan. And if we asked advisors, why don't you have a written strategic plan? I'm sure we'd get a variety of reasons, but I'm guessing that Coach Joe really knows the reasons deep down, and you can be more direct about it. So what's the deal? Why don't advisors like to, or why can't they complete a written strategic plan?
I think a lot of times it's how they were brought up in this industry. You can't, if you're at a large firm, your branch manager, sales manager, or everybody said, hey, what are your, they have these 2 or 3 page templates, or even worse, maybe an Excel sheet, and, plug some numbers in there and set it and forget it. So I think number one, I think there's a lot of negative anchors and associations to planning. Number two, I think some advisors, and this is really fascinating, would actually take time to actually write something down, several hours, maybe over several days. And then, it's almost like a tax return. Okay, I've checked the box on that. Let me go file it away, and they forget about it. And what I'm doing, like consultation evaluation for new advisors, I'm like, hey, do you have a business plan? Oh yeah, I did one several months ago. Like, well, can I get a copy? I got to find it. So that tells me immediately that, hey, you did some level of work, but you never really made it a living document that you're going to use each and every day as a governing piece for your goal. So I think you run into 2 challenges. I think number one, bad experiences, right? Number 2, frustration, because I've done this and I've not accomplished what I wrote down, right? So the plan sucks. Well, maybe not, maybe just you. Or the third piece is I did something, but I never figured out how to really bring it into my day-to-day, right? So there's 3 reasons why advisors fail at doing planning, quite frankly.
Do you think some advisors create a plan and on paper, it really does look good, and I would say share it with you, and you would look at it and say, that's a great plan, but deep down, it just doesn't do it for me. Maybe I'm just not inspired. Is that sometimes the issue?
I think a lot of times, I think there's 2 things. I think sometimes advisors play too safe with their planning, and we'll talk about how that happens. But I think the second scenario is that they make it so grandiose that there's a part of their brain that goes, I don't know if we can do this. And so it becomes really a source of pain. And so what happens, the patterns tends to be, I'm gonna put these great plans together. Then January comes and I gotta go rock star down in January. Oh, December, I really didn't do a lot, so I don't have a lot of momentum. So January comes and goes, and we look at where we are, we go, we're behind. That's okay. February comes, and but they finish February a little bit better, but they're behind. Now they're frustrated. It's painful. And what do human beings do when they got something painful? If they can, let's put it away. Let's put it in a box and forget about it, right? And their advisors for 10, 20, 30 years have repeated this pattern of getting excited, putting a plan together, overcommitting. Like in January, I tell all my clients, I don't want a lot of deliverables in January because you're just creating momentum. But that's how advisors will sabotage themselves. They'll expect to have this massive first quarter, and then it doesn't happen. And then it's just a total abandonment by Q2.
So part of it sounds like, is the overachieving mentality backfires on us because we realize this isn't going to happen. And to a certain extent, that flies in the face of the big, hairy, audacious goals, which always kind of moved me the wrong way. I mean, I love the idea of you've got to think big, but I certainly understand that the next step is the most important step. And I guess that's part of aging is you realize as you mature, progress is what matters. It's not some end point. And really thinking of that, I know you do 5-year strategic plans. And in 2020, a 5-year plan, I think, is just short of forever. So the road's going to wind, and we don't know what's around the next turn, but it doesn't mean you discount that 5-year plan or you don't even bother to think about it. So help me understand how I can frame a 5-year plan when there's so much disruption and uncertainty out there.
Right. So a 5-year plan, when we do it, is really a lot of top line stuff, right? So here's the destination inside this time window, right? Here's where I want to be in our conversation of 2025, 2026. Every year that the road's going to be different, right? So it's about, okay, so inside of that 5-year window, every time we're doing the 12-year, we're just going to do it every year, 2025 becomes 2026 and 2027. So inside of that 5-year, you're doing a 12 months. So we take it and we extrapolate it down to, okay, next 12 months, what do we need to do? And that's where we can make the adjustments, the alterations as situations, conditions warrant it. And I'll say this, whatever your goals are for 2025, and we were going through, 2020 here, a little bit probably 2021. I am totally on board on the belief that I don't care what happened here, your 2025 goals are not at risk. As long as you've adapted and you understand each year going forward, that we don't have to throw away or abandon our long-term vision. We're going to have to be a little flexible in how we get there, right? The road is probably the map is not being the map we ultimately want it, but it's going to be still available to us, and you have to adapt and overcome. So I don't get into this whole concept, well, now we just can't do that. That's where you get into the psychology of goals. And my experiences are, and I've got a laboratory every day in my work. My clients are doing great this year. Everybody pretty much is up or, up a lot. And why? Because not that I forced it, but we had very, very direct conversations on, look, this is our reality. How do we move forward? Right? And when I say move forward, I didn't say, how do we survive? How do we move forward? So totally can be done. You just got to decide that's what you want to do and commit to it.
So let's take two groups of advisors. They both have reasonable goals. They're slightly out of reach, but they're achievable. They're approaching the year saying, here's what we're going to do. You've got the one group that by the end of the year, they've pressed on, they've achieved, they've done extremely well. You've got another group on the other end that they really struggled with it. Can you point to one or two things that really separates either end of the spectrum?
I think there's really like two things. First off is how you set the game up first, right? So what most advisors do is they set up what I call pass-fail goals. So let's just talk top line production. Let's just keep it on the top. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to do $2 million in the next 12 months, so great. What does that mean? Is that the minimum acceptable? Is that the brass ring? Is that somewhere in between? Because every client that I work with, we do what we do a goal range. And I say, look, what is the minimum acceptable that you'll check a box with and declare victory for the year? And then what's the one we throw the big party for? And then anywhere in between there, we end up there, we declare victory. And so, and this is not a global rule, but for example, I may say, hey, look, bottom line rung, let's go 5 to 8% year over year. Our mid range may be 12 to 15%. Our top range may be 20% year over year, right? Just as an illustrative example. So all of a sudden, I've taken this scenario where this advisor had a very small target that it's tiny, right? We've now expanded it, and psychologically, that game is a lot more proactive and impactful than stressing over hitting this, which, by the way, most advisors, there's too many variables. There's market variables, economic variables, client variables, right? We know your client can come in with $100,000 or they can come in with $10 million, right? All those variables. So why would an advisor want to sit there and have what I call pass-fail goals? It's when you think about it from that perspective, it almost sounds ludicrous to even contemplate putting a pass-fail goal together. So I think that's number one. That's number one. Number two, when they put a goal together, they don't really vet it. And here's what I mean by vetting. There's really a four-step process. Number one, what the goal is. And is it measurable, specific, and my perfect world, rangeable? Number one. Number two, why is it a must? And the word must is the key word there, not I like to try this year, or I hope to. No. Are you willing to go to war for this? And you've got to sell me on that. You sell yourself on that. You write it out. Third element, how we're going to get it done. This is probably the easiest part. Okay, how many new clients we need? The recipe, as I like to call it. That's a 5-minute conversation. Most advisors can figure it out real quick. But number four is really the key one. Who do you need to become to pull this off? Because if I'm talking to a $1.5 million advisor and they want to go to $2 million, my comment is always going to be, hey, I know what the $1.5 million version of you looks like. I'm talking to that person right here, right now. What does the $2 million person need to look like? What do they need to think? How do they need to behave? What are their habits? What are their rituals? Because if that does not happen, this will not happen, right? The man or woman first, then the money.
So I think if I heard you correctly, you started with metrics in the conversation because
Yes.
that's easy for me to identify. I'm a goals-based financial planner. I love a good goal, right? And even if I only hit 70% of that goal, which may be if you're an OKR fan and you know the metrics, 70% is success. So
Yes.
we understand the process. But you made a little switcheroo in there, Joe. We started with metrics, but then all of a sudden you shifted to mindset.
Yep.
And knowing you, I know that you start with mindset when you do strategic planning. So how about we talk about why mindset is so important, and then also how do I get there? Because I've got to get off the metrics, the numbers, goals, and I have to change who I am and how I behave first before any of that's going to happen. So help me understand how to approach that.
Well, I mean, the first thing you've got to do is what's your belief around this, right? So if you're an advisor who believes that it's all about the metrics and the numbers and the OKRs and I'm good and it's about everything else, then there's no conversation, right? So that's number one. But if we're going to have the conversation, my experience is very simple. Metrics without mindset is zero. Nothing happens. So it's part of the recipe, it's part of the formula. Now, and I can take an advisor back. So if I've got a naysayer, for lack of a better term, I can take them back in their career and say, well, how'd you end up here? Well, I just made a decision. Well, how'd you make that decision? Oh, then they started, I made the shift in my mindset. So I just take them back and they realize they've already done it. They just maybe never declared it in the way that I like it declared, right? So for an advisor to grow, and we'll let everybody determine what that means to them. It's going to be personal growth first. Like you, the human being, have got to make a declaration of why you want to grow, what growth is, the metric, right? Why you want to grow. We just talked about that. How we're going to pull it off. But then the most important, like I said, is, if you go back in time to year one as an advisor, and then 20, 30 years later, you're not that same human being. You're just not. None of us are. But instead of it being happenstance, why don't we control that? So instead of just letting the world kind of shape us and our inputs and stuff like that, why don't we be intentional and say, you know what? I'm going to figure out what my beliefs need to be a $3 million producer. I'm going to figure out how it aligns to my values, what's most important to me. I'm also going to figure out how I need to talk to myself and what my self-image needs to be. Like I need to walk through it, because where most advisors sabotage their growth game is the man or woman in the mirror. They don't believe they deserve that, or they don't believe they're capable of that. They can write it down, but there's self-doubt. So this is where the sabotage happens. Now, it doesn't manifest in that exactly way. How it manifests is, I don't get up early. I don't do my morning game plan. I come in the office. I just kind of play office, right? I'm kind of comfortable. And that's the other part of the equation is, look, growth and excellence is an uncomfortable game. Just like if you're going to be a world-class athlete, you're going to be sore. There are going to be times you get injured. You've got to rehab. That just comes with the territory. If you're going to be a highly successful financial advisor, mentally and emotionally, there are going to be times you're going to be uncomfortable. You got to push yourself to that growth game. a lot of advisors, their concept is, if I can just get to $500,000, I'll be good. If I can get to, they have this like goal, they don't say it out loud, but my world will be nice and comfortable once I hit X. And you know this game, you get there, you're like, man, this is not enough. My lifestyle, so we go up. So it's really just about declaring what is already going on, putting it front and center, and owning it, quite frankly.
I vividly remember going through a process more than once where I had a good year of flow of assets or new relationships, however you want to count the metric, and the needle moved revenue wise, and you still feel the same way. You still feel that 10 or 20% more revenue. Why, that would give me a little extra margin, Joe. And then I could hire the next person and I'd increase my capacity. And then you get the 20% extra revenue and you think, another 20% revenue, Joe, and I could have that extra capacity to hire someone. And going through that, to me, it's fascinating. And you have to have, I guess, the self-awareness to know that that is normal. You're always going to think that you need a little more. And it's okay. I don't need to beat myself up and say, I'm always thinking a little more is better. I just got to recognize that that's a tendency, but now let's figure out what I really need. Just kind of put it off to the side where 20% more revenue, I may feel the exact same way. Maybe I won't, but you know what? I don't need to care about that right now, I think. I just need to take a look at where I am and then try to figure it out. Is that the way to approach it, or do I have to attack it more aggressively?
No, I mean, I think, it's interesting because when I talk to people, sometimes advisors, I'll say, I'm going to give you two choices. And first I'll ask them, when do you plan to retire? Well, I never plan to retire. I said, great, good.
That's
so
right. We're never retiring. Love the
all right,
business.
Cool. All right, cool. All right. So I'm going to give you two choices. You can grow at 20% a year, and literally your hair is going to be on fire. It's going to be, it's just going to be like you can pull it off. Not going to be a pleasant experience. Or you can grow at 12% and it fits like a glove. You get your downtime, you get this, everything fits. I'm not saying there's not moments where it's going to be what it is, but and so when I give advisors the two situations, 95% will always choose the 12% versus the 20% because emotionally it feels better, right? So I said, then why don't you create your game this way? Well, this is where the type A, the drivers come in. Like, well, like somehow they think they're good. I said, no. Isn't the ultimate version of success economic abundance, fulfillment, time freedom? I mean, we had to really define it for a second, right? And because most in our game, in our industry, it's all about the money. Rev, production. I say, and I've worked with many multi-million-dollar producers. Their bank accounts are flying. They're miserable human beings. Why? They built a job. Well-paying job, but job nevertheless, right? So it's really about saying, well, let's have our cake and I really believe this is the only industry that I'm aware of that you can have your cake and eat it too. Let's have economic abundance, let's have time freedom, and let's have, emotional fulfillment, which is you're doing what you want to be doing the way you want to be doing it, right? I mean, that to me is the triad of success in our business, right? But if you don't plan for it that way, you'll end up hitting some of the targets, but why not just plan to hit them all and then go for it? That's all. That's always been my core philosophy.
I love that. The last time we spoke, it was the summer of 2020. The pandemic was in the first couple of months. And I joked about the B icon on my iPad for Bloomberg that called to me every morning. And I just wanted to know what happened overnight and what was going on in the markets. And you said, is there anything in the news that can't wait an hour for you to find out? And I thought, it's always the right question that makes you think. Because I have no answer. There's nothing that I need to know at that moment at say 5 a.m. that I couldn't wait till 6 or 7 in the morning. So I want to say thank you. You have set me free, Joe. I do not check Bloomberg anymore early in the morning. And I will tell you, the few times I have, it's as if there was no emotion behind it because I didn't actually care because I knew there was nothing I had to see there. And it was anticlimactic. And then I just stopped doing it because I have a morning routine that I know is so much more important. You're big on the morning routine. And I know that. I know that's part of your mindset. I think you call it morning magic. Can you talk a little bit about that magic that happens?
Yeah, so we call it Magellan Morning 8, and it's actually part of our business planning process. One of the final things that you'll do, we want to go from 5 years all the way extrapolate down to what I have to do today. Like that to me is a complete planning process. And so how an advisor starts, and we have an 8-step protocol, and we'll go into a couple of real steps. So the first thing, which is not a step, maybe it should be, do not go into your inbox, do not go into Bloomberg or CNBC or Fox, none of that stuff. Just leave it alone. First 30, 60 minutes. And what I really want you to do, this is the most important meeting of the day, the meeting with yourself. So we're going to have you review your goals, right? Your quarterly game plan, your daily game plan. We're going to have you meditate. We're going to have you visualize. We're going to have you have a conversation with yourself. My perfect world, we're going to have you do one thing of gratitude. Maybe you'll the time comes, you'll type out a little note to somebody, or maybe mention, or just be gracious in your own mind. That's fine too. What it's really about, it's about two things. It's about, number one, remembering why you're doing what you're doing in a proactive manner. Number two, it's to put you in a certain frame, certain mindset, certain state, if you will, so that you can go ahead and be excellent. Just like world-class athletes just don't show up and go do their thing 5 minutes before game time. There's a protocol they run prior to being excellent. Every advisor needs to create a protocol prior to having daily excellence. And that's talk about immutable pieces, right? So that to me is a key predictor. Like if I talk to a client, I say, first thing, tell me about your morning. And if it's getting a little sideways, it's an absolute predictor what's going to happen. Conversely, I can be talking to somebody and they're not doing well. I say, well, walk me through the first hour of your day. What time do you get up? I get that. Then it's typical pattern. I get up, first thing, news, second, email. I said, where's the you time? What do you mean? Well, to get mentally prepared. What do you mean? Like it's like we're such in a rush to get going, and yet we get there and we do nothing. It's a weird dynamic. Now the offices are closed, but I was talking to advisors all the time. I said, well, I got to be in by 7:30. Well, what are you doing? Going through email. Like, okay, like you're in early, but what do you produce all day? And I'm not talking economically. Like, what do you get done in that day? And most advisors, if they focus 2 to 4 hours a day on their business, that's a lot. I mean, when I talk about like high level genius type, let's get stuff done, right? So if I can have them do a morning piece, and then because inside of that morning, you're creating your day, that's part of the deliverable inside of that, they're going to be way more on task on what has to get done. And they're going to be, and the part of the secret of success in this business is consistency. Like if you have a couple good days, that's great. But then you bag the other 2 days. When you average it out, it's mediocre. So it cancels each other out. So why not let's just be very good every day, consistent. But this is a boring business. It's supposed to feel a little bit like Groundhog Day. When it gets exciting, when the market goes down 1,500 points, that's not the kind of excitement we want, right? So I want it to kind of be, you want to get the juice in life, you get it outside the business. That's where your bucket list comes in. That's where your other pursuits and passions come in. This is the economic engine that enables the rest of your life. And that's the way you need to look at it.
I knew we were going to talk about the morning routine this morning, and I was going through what I've gone over the last few months. And just to keep it as short as possible, I've expanded my morning time. It has doubled in the amount of time I spend in the morning. It's a couple hours of a routine that I do, and it's being grateful and things along that line. And I've noticed that I'm actually working fewer hours in the office. So I traded an hour in the afternoon for an hour in the morning, but it took me a few months to figure it out because I still feel uber productive. And I'm at peace at the end of the day, and I'm getting things done, and I can walk away knowing I'm actually finished. So like many people will say, you're working less, but getting more done. For my case, I'm going to credit it to the morning routine and constantly working on that and expanding it. It's also why when we spoke last and we were talking about year-end planning, you mentioned your year-end strategic planning. That's why we're doing this podcast, because as we were having that conversation, I thought, I know you have this program. I've never gone to your year-end program, but I know what you do. I know you personally. And I thought, I've got to do that this year. And then as soon as we spoke, I thought, okay, we got to do a podcast. So we've got to talk about that. So let's kind of wrap this up, talk about what's coming up. And then also you've offered to listeners of our podcast and friends of Advisor 2X a significant discount. As far as I could tell, it looks like one of the biggest ones I've seen out there. So talk about what your program is and when it's coming up.
Great. So, I mean, first of all, this will be my 19th year doing strategic planning for advisors. What we're going to do, because of the way the landscape is this year, we're going to pivot it to a virtual event. It's going to start December 15th, which is a Tuesday. It does run for 4 days, and people say, oh my God, 4 days. It's a couple hours each day, so it's not like it's a full day because we know attention spans. There's several modules we're going to go through, pre-work. It's the most complete process. I've never had anybody go through it and wish they had not. In fact, I've got clients who this will be their 19th one they've done. They've been to every one of them. Just something that, that we just do. So because of your tribe, Ross, what we're going to do is, if you're an advisor, just happen to go there, it's going to be $895 for the entire program. But because you're part of the Advisor 2X tribe, we're going to give you a special rate of $495. But you need to act, because we do have capacity control. We don't, there's not going to be thousands and thousands of advisors. We're going to probably have a couple hundred, which is what we're looking for because of Zoom, and we want to have it somewhat intimate for people. It's the most important year. And I'm not saying that just because we're here right now, but just look at what's happened this year. I mean, it's truly, you do not want to go into 2021 just trying to survive, rudderless. It's time to get it all together, and all things are possible, but they're only possible if you write them down and make them real.
Yeah, I believe 2021 is the start of a separation year for many advisory practices, not just because we're moving from survival to say, how do we thrive, but how we integrate technology, how we approach things. We talked about that during our last podcast. So I really think this is an inflection point in the business where there's going to be a group of advisors and advisory firms who choose to adapt, to behave differently, and nurture relationships and offer new services to clients. And they're going to separate from the pack in a way that I'm not sure how the other firms or advisors are actually going to catch up. So I don't think I've ever been this excited for year-end strategic planning. No, I've never been this excited for year-end strategic planning. I'll just go ahead and say it because I see it. This is a great opportunity. If you love what you do and you love this business, now's the time to really buckle down, figure out what your next steps are going to be, and go take care of more people. So, Joe, thanks for being on the show. Any final words for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, look, the bottom line, whether you want to come through my program, here's the one thing I will say. Do not go into 2021 without written goals, a written game plan. I don't care how you want to pull it off. It's up to you, but do not do that. You have a moral obligation to your clients, to your teams, to your family to go ahead and create a proactive game plan for 2021.
Joe, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you for listening to Outcomes. Subscribe now to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Advisor 2X. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.